It is indeed a pleasure to be visiting with you and to have the opportunity to be here for these few short days and to share some lessons from the Word of God with you. We've been talking a little bit about our work and encouraging you to go to our web pages and look at some of the material. I think someone was telling me that they had a little difficulty in getting the web page to open. So sometimes, you know how that is. If you're off one letter or one dot, sometimes it'll open a different one. But if you have any trouble with this, then just perhaps you could Google International Bible Teaching Ministry. International Bible Teaching Ministry, Cookeville, Tennessee. C-O-O-K-E-V-I-L-L-E, Cookeville, Tennessee. And our webpage will open. The same is true if you're having any trouble with this, then just Google International College of the Bible, and you'll be able to get that. Also, I didn't put up, and I wanted to do that, my email address. My initials, RDG at IBT Ministries.org. RDG at IBTministries.org is my email address. I'd be happy to hear from you. We put out a monthly newsletter, and our newsletter will be posted online, so you can go here and get our online newsletter. We also try to post pictures of some of our mission trips. We're running behind on this. We don't have last year's Africa trip up yet, and we don't have some of the trips that we made, but I'm hoping that we'll put on our website before too long. The lady who helps us do that will get last year's Africa trip, and then give us a few weeks after we get back, we'll put some pictures of this trip on our webpage. So I want to encourage you to look at that. We're in need of volunteers, faithful Christians, men and women, who send and receive email. We have a doctrinal questionnaire. We're very serious about our work and our teachers, and we want to know all teachers from all over the world. We're not just being prejudiced toward anyone, but all of our teachers, United States, wherever they are, they fill out a very lengthy doctrinal questionnaire. We want to know that our teachers are sound, because if they're not, they won't be teaching our students properly. So we want to be sure they are. We ask them to fill out the doctrinal questionnaire, and then we have those individuals volunteering. You would be assigned maybe 12 students, and it doesn't take all that much time for you to go to a certain web page where there's a grading key, and to grade those and send them back to the students by email, and also encourage them to keep on studying. And we're seeing, for the past 2 years, we've had about 14 per year of our Bible correspondence course students to obey the gospel. We have roughly 13,000 Bible correspondence course students from over 170 nations. All of them speak English, and that's one of the requirements. But if you'd like to volunteer to be one of our teachers, we would like to have you being one of our teachers. We have a few students in Malaysia, and we've had some contacts that have finished the courses, and Ipoh and Richard Lee and others have made contact, and maybe they can obey the gospel one day. We hope that that will happen. So please consider that, and if you can, be one of our teachers. We're also trying to print hard copies of our correspondence courses and make those available for congregations to use, and also our tracts. Many tracts on this web page, and we're putting new ones up all the time. So look to those web pages. As I said, if you have any trouble opening them, just Google the name, and it'll open up, and you'll be able to find it. To open your Bibles with me to 2 Samuel chapter 11. 2 Samuel chapter 11. In the Old Testament, there are many great character studies, great lessons that we can learn. You know, Paul said that whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patient and comfort Scriptures might have hope. So we can gain, even though we're not under the Old Testament law, we can gain some very valuable lessons from studying the Old Testament. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, there's a story that we're familiar with. It's the story of King David. And King David was a good man. The Bible says he was a man after God's own heart. But the Bible is very unique in that it records the good things about a person's life, but it also records bad things. You know, if I were to be writing a book about my life, the autobiography of me, there'd be some things I'd probably leave out. But the Bible doesn't do it that way. The Bible shows you the good side of King David, but it shows you the dark side or the bad side of King David. Mistakes that he made, things that he should not have done. And that's true with many individuals. In the New Testament, you know, Peter was a great man. Because you remember on one occasion, he denied that he even knew the Lord. He cursed and swore and said, "No, I'm not one of the disciples. I don't even know him." Well, that was something that he regretted, that he repented of doing that. Here is the story of David and his sin with Bathsheba. And we normally think about David and Bathsheba, and we talk about some things that happened to David and some things that he did see. You recall, he goes out on the top of his house, the rooftop, and he sees this woman, Bathsheba, and she was bathing, and she was a beautiful woman, and David lusted after this woman. Although she was married, that didn't stop David. He committed adultery with this woman, and she was found with child. And then you recall, he tries to hide his sin, so he sends for the husband, who was a soldier in his army, brings him back in hopes that he will spend some time with his wife and think that the child belongs to him. But he would not go be with his wife because his brethren were out in the battlefield fighting, and he just would not do that. He was thinking about them, and his heart was with them. And you recall that finally, David writes a letter, instruction, to give to the general of the army. And this was a bad thing as well. To think about his own army. It says to put him out in the front of the battle. And when the battle gets very heated and hot, then suddenly withdraw from him so that he will be killed by the enemy. David murdered Uriah. Not with his own hands, but he murdered Uriah. He tries to cover up his sin and all of the events that take place, and then he thinks that he has covered his sin. He sends for this woman. She comes, he marries her, but the child dies. And the prophet Nathan is sent to talk to him and try to get him to see the error of his way. And he does see the error of his way. And God forgives him of his sin. So we normally think about those things. But this lesson is a little bit different and a little unique, I think. And I titled the lesson, Some Things That David Did Not See from the Rooftop. Some things he did not see from the rooftop. Number one, evidently he did not see the sanctity of marriage. When he asked, "Who is this woman?" And they said, "Why, this is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah." He finds out she's a married woman. Now David was king. He had several wives under the old law. Men had so many times more than one wife. And sometimes today people have a hard time with that. They think, well, if they could do that under the old law, then we can do that today. Well, no, we can't. Jesus gives us his law in regard to marriage, and it's one man and one woman. We can't have 2 wives or 3 wives. But it's quite common for kings to have several wives. So King David could have had any of the eligible women in that area as his wife. But when he finds out she's married, He should have said, oh, she's married. Okay, she belongs to someone else. But he didn't. Sinned for her anyway. See, he didn't recognize and see the sanctity of marriage. Marriage is something very, very important. This woman belonged to another man. He had no right to her. Her husband. They're together, not him and her. In Matthew 19, Jesus talked about that when they came to him, tempting him and asking him if it was lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause. He cited them back to the beginning and said, have you not read? He didn't make them in the beginning, made them male and female. And said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. In Exodus chapter 20 and verse 14, God's law said, thou shalt not commit adultery. David is subject to that law. Although he's the king, he's not exempt from the law of God. The law of God applies to him. But, like a lot of people, I suppose, David sort of felt like maybe God's law applies to everybody else, but not to me. But it did apply to him. In Leviticus chapter 20, in verse 10, the penalty for adultery was death. It was one of the sins that God had said. Not all of the 10 Commandments and not all sins were punishable by death, but some of them were. And this was one that was. Very serious to commit adultery. And God said in Leviticus 20 and verse 10 that both the man and the woman were to be put to death. So David is about to engage in something that in the sight of God, the penalty for doing that is death, even for him as the king. He doesn't take it as seriously as he should have. So David, evidently, while he was there on this rooftop, he did not see the sanctity of marriage. We must see, to understand just how sacred and how wonderful marriage is, and it is the basic unit or basic element of society. The oldest institution is the home of the 3 divine institutions. The first one was the home, the second one was the government, God-ordained government, and then the third was the church. But the oldest is the home. And the very society, the very fabric of a society is the home. Because a society is made up of homes. And here David is not recognizing the sanctity of marriage. Number 2. Another thing that David did not see from his rooftop is self-control. He did not practice self-control. Even kings were to practice self-control. They were not exempt from practicing self-control. In the book of Proverbs, as well as the book of Ecclesiastes, there is beautiful language, poetic language that is used to describe the love that a man has for his wife and that a woman has for her husband. In Proverbs 5 and verse 15, the proverb writer said it this way. He said, drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running water out of thine own well. A beautiful, poetic way of saying that the wonderful love that's between a man and his wife is to be shared between those two and those two only. Well, David had wives, and he is wanting somebody else's wife, which he's not practicing self-control. In connection with that, Proverbs 9 and verse 17 and 18, this seems to be somewhat the motto of a lot of people, where the writer said, continuing this same thought, stolen waters are sweet, but he knoweth not that the dead are there. Stolen waters. Stealing someone else's wife. And this is something that happens and takes place. And people have affairs and they don't live up to their promise that they made to be faithful and to love each other. And he said, some view that as being something that is sweet, stolen waters. But he said they don't even know, they're not aware of the death that is there. Also in the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and verse 2, Paul would talk to them about some of the things that they wrote and questions that they had to him about marriage. And it's a very long discourse on marriage in 1 Corinthians 7. And he said, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. So one of the purposes of marriage is to avoid fornication. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 4, the Hebrew writer said that marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge. So God says that this relationship between man and woman is a beautiful thing, it's a wonderful thing, but it is to be enjoyed within the confines of marriage. Outside of marriage, it's called fornication, it's called adultery, and it's sinful. God doesn't want us to engage in that or participate in that. So David did not practice self-control. Now, what happens when we do not practice self-control? Well, we get into trouble. But many times, when we don't do the right thing, we influence others. And our bad example is carried on to the next generation or to other people that are watching our lives. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, think about this. David didn't practice self-control. He would take another man's wife. He would allow his physical appetites and desires to go unchecked and do something that is wrong. David had a son. His name was Ammon. Ammon had a half-sister. Her name was Tamar. She was a beautiful young lady. And he looked upon his half-sister in a way that he should not have looked upon her. And he lusted after his sister. And he was moaning and complaining because he could not be with his half-sister. And he had a friend, a very wicked friend, named Jonadab. And Jonadab gave him some very bad advice. And I have another sermon I preach sometimes called A Friend Named Jonadab. And unfortunately, most of us have a Jonadab in our lives. Somebody that's going to give us bad advice and tell us the wrong thing to do. And Jonadab said, why? You're the king's son. You can have anything you want. And if you are attracted to your sister, then that's okay. Why don't you pretend to be sick and request that your sister come in and cook food for you and feed you? And he did. And he asked the servants to leave the room and asked her to come close to him and cook this food. And she's a very innocent young lady trying to help her sick brother to get well. And then he grabs her and forced her. He raped his own sister. Now, where in the world did this young man learn not to control his appetites and desires? From his father. His father didn't control it. Do you think the son maybe knew that his father had committed this with Bathsheba? I think so. We have it recorded here in the Bible. We know about it thousands of years later. Why wouldn't the son have known about it? So dad didn't practice self-control, and now his son is not practicing self-control. See, we influence others. And it didn't stop there, because Tamar had a brother named Absalom. And he heard about what had taken place. And David didn't do anything about this. David allowed one of his sons to rape one of his daughters, and he didn't do anything. Now, he had a moral obligation as a father to do something, and he had a legal obligation as the king to do something. But he didn't do anything. He just let it go. So Absalom said, okay, I'll take care of this. And he just waited, let a little time go by, and then he had a feast. And he invited all of his brothers and all of his sisters to come to this feast. He was giving this party. And when Ammon came to the party, he had some men waiting for him, and they killed him. Now, he got what the law said he deserved. Rape was another of the crimes that was punishable by death. find it interesting that a lot of societies have based many of their laws on the Bible. Notice that? Not all crimes are equal. You know, walking across the street somewhere that's not at a traffic light doesn't get you executed. You know, there's some crimes that are serious and some that are not as serious. And this is based on the Bible. The morals and ethics of the Bible. And really, without the Bible, how could you ground anything as being right or wrong? It would be subjective. It would be like saying, I like broccoli or I don't like broccoli. Very subjective. But the Bible, we have right and wrong grounded in the Bible. It's not that I like murder or I don't like murder. Murder is morally wrong. It's always been wrong. Because it's grounded in God's Word. So self-control was something that David had not practiced. And Ammon, of course, did not as well. In Proverbs 6 and verse 23, the proverb writer said, Whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. Think about that. The Bible says that committing adultery, doing that is done because of a lack of understanding. We don't realize what we're doing. And he says we're destroying our own soul in doing that. In 1 Thessalonians 4, in verse 4, Paul said that as Christians, we need to learn how to possess our vessel or our body. Which you're in control of your body. You're in control of your body. And we need to see that and understand that. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, in verse 27, I buffet my body and I bring it in subjection. You know, I don't serve my body serves me. That's what Paul is saying. And then in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 13, it's so sad that you had a group of people there at Corinth. Corinth was such an immoral city that Paul had to write to Christians who lived in this immoral city, and he had to tell them something that you would think you wouldn't have to tell a Christian. And that is, the purpose of the body is not for fornication. That's not why God gave you a physical body, so you can go out and commit fornication. Evidently, some felt that that was the purpose of the body, or Paul wouldn't have told them that. They thought that God gave them a physical body so they could go out and commit fornication to gratify the lust of the flesh, and that was the purpose of their body, or the purpose of their life. And we're going to look at the lesson next hour on what is our purpose in life. And I assure you, it's not fornication. That's not our purpose in life. So David did not practice self-control. He did not see self-control from the rooftop. Number 3, another thing that David did not see is the wages of sin. David saw the momentary pleasure that's associated with sin, but he didn't see the consequences that comes about. And we don't a lot of times, do we? We only think for the moment. We think sometimes like animals instead of like human beings. We only think of the right now, the moment. And we should be thinking of the wages of sin or the consequences of sin. On this particular occasion, in 2 Samuel chapter 11, in verse 5, Bathsheba conceives and she tells David, I am with child. You know, some of the most beautiful words that come from the lips of an individual ought to be between a husband and wife who are married and who want to have children, and the wife says, guess what, dear? We're going to have a baby. Oh, what a wonderful time. Such excitement. Every little baby deserves to be born into a loving, caring family where it's wanted. But on this occasion, the news was more like this. Oh no, I'm going to have a baby. This is horrible. This is a terrible thing. She didn't want this child. He didn't want this child. This is the consequences of their sin. And that's not the way God wants it to be.
And you recall when the prophet Nathan came to him and told him that when he repented, God said he was going to forgive him and he was going to spare his life. The king wouldn't be killed because of his adultery. But there were consequences for his sin. One thing, he said, the sword will never depart from your house. You remember later on, his son Absalom rose up in rebellion and tried to take the throne from his father. And David fled and lived in caves and lived a very horrible life, running from his son who was trying to kill his own father and take the kingdom away from him. One of the things he said is the sword would never depart from your house, and your wives will be defiled in the sight of all Israel. Now I've wondered about this. David was up on the top of his house, the rooftop, when he saw Bathsheba. Later on, in 2 Samuel chapter 16, in verse 22, when Absalom is trying to take the kingdom away from his father, somebody gave him the idea and said, well, if you want the people to recognize you as the king, what you ought to do is take the king's wives and let them be your wife. So he put a tent up on the top of the house. I wonder if it's the same spot. And he goes in to David's wives in the sight of all Israel. What's the penalty? The sword is never going to depart from your family, and your wives, David was told, will be defiled before all Israel. When Absalom went in to his father's wife, he was committing adultery. He was defiling those women and defiling himself, because they were not his wives, they belonged to his father. And this was done on the rooftop. Maybe the same rooftop. So you see the wages of sin. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 says, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he reap. David evidently thought he wouldn't reap what he sowed. Well, I'm the king. I can commit adultery and I can have Uriah murdered, and who's going to tell me what to do? Nobody's higher than I am. I'm the king. Oh, even kings reap what they sow. And you may not always be punished in this life for everything you do, but it doesn't end with this life, does it? One day, every one of us has to stand before the judge of the earth, God, the one true God, who's going to judge every living person, or every person that's ever lived. The dead will stand before him, and the books are going to be opened, and we're going to be judged based on the things that are written in those books. So we may escape this life. Someone may be a dictator or a ruler, and they may get away with a lot of crimes and may not be punished for their evil deeds in this life. They will one day. You won't get away with anything. In Hosea chapter 8 and verse 6, Hosea said, for they have sown the wind, and they shall reap the whirlwind. That's the nature of sin. So as David is there on the housetop and he sees this beautiful woman, he didn't see the wages of sin. He didn't see the fruit of his actions. What is this going to cost you, David? It was a very, very costly mistake that he made. And he would live to regret that all the days of his life. In Psalm 51, it is said that he is the author of that psalm. And he said, my sin is ever before me. You know, we can be forgiven of things, but we have our memories, and we have the consequences of things that we've done. We have to live with that. Number 4, David did not see from the rooftop that you can't cover one sin by committing another sin. David tried to cover his sin by committing another sin. In 2 Samuel 6, he sends for Uriah. He's trying to get Uriah to be with his wife so that he'll think that's his child. That doesn't work. So as we said, he writes the note to give to the general, the head of the army. And what an immoral thing for a soldier to do to a fellow soldier. You know, soldiers protect each other. Soldiers want their side to win. They want to bring all their men home alive. So here he's given an order. What a position this put him in. He's given the order by his superior to put this good soldier, this faithful soldier, on the front part of the battle and then withdraw from him deliberately so he'll be murdered. That's not a good thing. So it caused him to be in a position to sin as well because of David's actions. You can't cover one sin by committing another sin. So David says, now what am I going to do? This woman, she's with child. And I can't get him to go be with his wife, so everybody's going to know that she's committed fornication. So I'll have him killed, and then I'll bring her to my house, and I'll marry her, and everything will be well. No. David, first of all, was an adulterer. Now he's an adulterer and a murderer. It's not getting better, is it? It's getting worse. The wages of sin. Sin is progressive. Sin grows. In Psalm 1, the psalmist said, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of the sinner, or sitteth in the seat of the scornful." Look at that. Walking, standing, and sitting. Progressive. It's getting worse. In Psalm 69, in verse 5, the psalmist said, "O God, Thou knowest my foolishness, and my sins are not hid from Thee." Now, David maybe deceived a lot of people. He didn't deceive God, not for one moment. God knew exactly what was taking place. So David, evidently from the rooftop, he did not see the proper way of covering sin. You don't commit another sin to cover a sin. You seek to be forgiven of that sin. That's how you properly cover your sin. Number 5, he did not see the guilt of sin. He did not see the guilt of sin. In 2 Samuel 11, in verse 26, and Bathsheba went along with this as well. She was guilty as well. But she lost a very good husband because of her sin. She committed sin with David, and David did not force himself upon this woman. She was a willing participant, so she's to blame as well as David is to blame. And she had a very good husband. It'd be hard to find a better husband from what we read about here than Uriah. And he dies because of her. Now she's mourning her husband. She's lost her husband. Sometimes things we do, as we said, they stay with us a long time. Psalm 51, verse 4, David said, "My sin is ever before me." He can be forgiven, but you can't bring back that man. That man's dead. He's dead forever. And the child is dead because of his actions. All of these things take place. And then you have Joab, the general, who's involved. He sins because of David. And then you have the consequences of sin. The sword will never depart from your house, and your wives will be defiled before Israel. He had such a family mess. And David set the wrong example before these people. A 6th point in 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 14, when the prophet Nathan came to him and was telling him of his sin, he told him that his sin had given great occasion for the adversary and the enemies of God to blaspheme. So God's people were in this land, and they were in a land where people were worshiping all kinds of false gods. Baal, all kinds of false gods were being worshipped, all kinds of false religions were there. And the people of Israel were worshiping the one true God, and they were trying to get other people to recognize the one true God. And now the king of the people who worship the one true God has done something that's going to give an occasion for the adversary to blaspheme. They're going to make fun of David and say, "Oh, the king who steals other men's wives, the king who is an adulterer, who serves the God." You know, a lot of times we don't think about our actions as Christians, as God's people. The things we do can bring reproach upon the church. In 1 Corinthians 5, This man was living with his father's wife. And the Christians knew about it. And it says in 1 Corinthians 5 that he was living in fornication, and such fornication that not even the pagans would do that. The pagans have a higher moral there than the Christians. That shouldn't be, rather. Our morals ought to be higher than the pagans. The pagans shouldn't be looking at us and laughing and making fun of our immorality. And when we do that, we give the enemies of God an occasion to blaspheme. When we sin, we're held up to ridicule by evil men. They make fun. They blaspheme. In Romans chapter 14 and verse 4, Paul said, "No man liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself." People are watching us. And a lot of times, the most powerful sermons I preach are not when I'm holding this in my hand, but it's when they're observing my life. They're watching how I live. I'm telling people how they ought to live, and then they're watching me. Am I an honest man? What kind of Christian am I? If I'm telling people that they need to be following the Bible and obeying the principles of the God of the Bible, but every time you do business with me, I cheat you. I'm a crook. That's not good, is it? Or I'm lying. I tell you something, and I'm not telling you the truth, and you catch me, and you know that I'm one that lies. And then again, I tell you something else, and I'm lying to you. Oh, that's not good, is it? No, Christians ought to be people with very high moral standards. Now, I know we make mistakes from time to time. It's one thing to make a mistake and ask for forgiveness and change, and another to just openly live in these sinful practices all of our lives. God's people, there was a great occasion for the people, the enemies of God, to blaspheme because of what had taken place. I was just thinking as I was preparing this lesson some time ago, I presented this lesson a few times, different places. I was thinking of just some of my preaching brethren in the United States that I've known. I've been preaching for about 44 years, and I've known a lot of preachers. And I've seen a lot of preachers do things that they shouldn't do. Now, as the church, the Lord's church, the church of the New Testament, we're telling and preaching people and telling them, oh, you need to leave those man-made churches, those denominations, and come to the one true church you read about in the Bible. Preaching that and telling them. And that's right, that's good. But what happens when we're telling people in the community that we're the true people of God, but then we don't live up to it? I've known of gospel preachers that have left their wives and taken up with other women. And the people in the community would laugh and make fun. It gives the people in the community a great occasion to blaspheme. And they say, oh, that's the fornicating church. That's the fornicating preacher. There, see? There he goes. He's the fornicating preacher. God's word said, thou shalt not commit adultery. He says, thou shalt commit adultery. So they make fun. They make light of the truth of God's word. I knew of a druggist, a chemist, a pharmacist, that was a member of the church and a leader of the church. And he was taking money from the government through the Medicare, the Medicaid system. And he was charging the government for the prescription, the name brand, but he was giving the customer the generic brand. So he was cheating the government. And they, FBI watched him and found out over a period of years he had stolen millions of dollars from the federal government. He was arrested and handcuffed, and his name in the paper, picture, member of the Church of Christ, arrested for stealing from the government. You think he didn't know better than that? He knew better than that. So the people would make fun of the church and say, oh, the Church of Christ, yeah, you better hold on to your wallets. You get around those people, they'll steal your money. They're crooks. That's what people say when things like this take place. I had a preacher friend of mine. We were in school together. And he went back to teaching at the school. And he was about my age. This was just a few years ago. He was probably, when this happened, he was about 55 or 58 years old. And he fell in love with a 15-year-old girl that he was teaching at school, and started having an affair with her. And he was caught. And in the United States, having sexual relations with a minor is statutory rape. He was arrested and handcuffed. He's in prison right now. And people laugh about the church. And he preached in the community and tell people how you need to come to the church you read about in the New Testament. Oh, really? The church in the New Testament? Is that the one where you have sexual relationships with 15-year-old girls? Your students that you're teaching and taking advantage of? See, look at what has taken place. Now, we can be forgiven of sin. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. We can be forgiven of sin. But do we think sometimes of the consequences of our actions and the reproach and the shame that it's going to cause to our families and to our community, to our brothers and sisters in Christ? A lot of times, again, we're just like animals. We act without thinking. And that's what David did. And we can learn from David. Don't do that. Think about your actions. Think of how this is going to affect your family. This preacher friend of mine I'm telling you about has a very sweet mother that grieved over this. She's a member of the church. And her son's picture in the newspaper. And he's in prison. And the gospel preacher has a teenage daughter that's the same age of the girl that he was going with. And they were friends. And she has the reproach and the shame that her father had to go through all of this. And again, people just don't think a lot of times. David didn't. He just thought of himself, just thought of a moment's pleasure and not thinking about what's going to happen to me, how this will influence my family, and how it will influence the people of the community and the society, my relationship with God. And you know, you spend years and years building a reputation in your character. That's something that if you're 60 years old, it's taking you 60 years to get your character where it is. You can lose it in 30 minutes. You can ruin yourself, where you basically have to move from your community in shame and disgrace because of decisions that you make. Now again, you can be forgiven, but still there's the stigma of what you've done, and it still follows you. My sin is ever before me, the Bible said there in Psalm 51 with David. David truly repented. He repented. And that's why God didn't have him killed. And I think it's very interesting as well. And you see a side of David and can relate maybe to David and see how that David's like a lot of people in society. When the prophet Nathan came to him, he was very smart. He didn't just come to David and say, David, you're an adulterer. You need to repent. He might have had his head chopped off if he does that. But he came to him with a parable. Told him a story. David was a shepherd. David loved sheep. And he had lived among his sheep. And to him, the sheep were like brothers and sisters. They were family members. He loved his animals. So the prophet comes to him and says, well, there was these two men. This man had many, many sheep. And this man over here, he just had the one little lamb. And he loved that little lamb like a dog. It was his pet. And the man who had the many sheep had a guest, a visitor to come and visit. And he was going to be a good host, so he wanted to feed the guest. So instead of taking one of the many lambs out of his flock and killing it and cooking it, he goes over to his neighbor's house and takes the one little lamb away from him that he loved like a dog. And he killed that lamb. And he cooked it and fed to the guests. What should we do? And you can just see David. He's just furious over this. David said, the man that did this ought to die. Well, that's stronger than the law allowed. The law of Moses said you restore a lamb fourfold. So he owed 4 lambs to the man who stole the one. Not the death penalty for stealing a lamb. So David's ready to kill a man over a lamb. He can see that, but he can't even see the sin in his own life. He had committed the sin that's really worthy of death. And adultery. He can see the mistakes in somebody else's life, but he couldn't see the mistakes in his own life. Doesn't that sound like people? It's easier for me to see your sin and shake my head and say, oh, you need to, than it is to see my sin. But I need to look within and see my sin. And ultimately, I'm responsible for my sin. I won't stand before God on the day of judgment and give an account for you. I'll stand before God on the day of judgment and give an account for myself. Well, as we bring our lesson to an end, I want to look at some lessons and some concluding things from the lesson. Proverbs 4 in verse 23 says, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. There's where we start. Jesus said in Matthew 15 and verse 19, out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts, adultery, fornication, murder. It all starts in the heart. And the Bible heart is up here, not here. The Bible says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So we have to guard our hearts. Be careful. When we allow bad thoughts to be in our heart, that's why Jesus cautioned us about lust. And he said in Matthew 5, he said, whosoever looketh upon a woman and lusteth after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So he's trying to tell us, don't lust. Guard your heart. Keep your heart pure. Because an impure heart will lead to impure actions. An impure heart will lead to filthy language. An impure heart will lead to lying, stealing, and being dishonest. Keep your heart pure. Fill your heart with good things. And that's going to help you in your life. Guard your heart. Keep it pure. In Psalm 101, verse 3, the psalmist said, I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. Something to think about, isn't it? I will set no wicked thing before my eyes. The internet can be a great blessing. There's good things on the internet. There's some terrible things on the internet also. Terrible, terrible things. And you know, times change. We have a lot of new gadgets. But basically people are the same. You know, in this day and time, you can go to movie theaters and on huge screen you can watch people engage in some of the most vile and ungodly acts that can be imagined. But you know, during the days of the Apostle Paul, there were theaters that people could go to, amphitheaters, and they could pay money and watch people literally, not on the big screen, but on the stage, literally engage in some of the most vile and immoral acts that you can imagine. What difference does it make if you go to the theater, out in the amphitheater, and watch people literally do these things, or you watch it on the big screen? It has the same effect on you, doesn't it? So we need to be careful what we watch. And parents need to be careful what their children watch. We need to keep our hearts pure, keep ourselves pure. I've known of a lot of men who've ruined their lives on the internet by beginning to chat with a lady somewhere and beginning to strike up a friendship, and then they want to meet, and they begin to get together, and the next thing you know, he's leaving his wife. We need to be careful what we do, how we conduct ourselves. Guard your heart. David made several serious mistakes that he would regret for the rest of his life. Isn't it better to avoid those mistakes rather than suffer with the consequences of those mistakes? Think before you act. Think before you act. There are several things that David did not see from the rooftop that he should have seen. He saw some things that he should not have seen, but then there's some other things that he ought to have thought about, and they ought to have helped him before he acted. But like David, David was forgiven, and like David, we can be forgiven. I don't want to leave the impression from this lesson that if there's some sins or certain sins you've committed, you're just doomed. There's no hope for you. You don't want to leave that impression. You can be forgiven of sins. If you're not a Christian, the sins that you have committed, you can be forgiven of when you obey the gospel of Christ. The blood of Jesus washes away sins that we repent of. You must stop those sins. You can't continue to live in those sins to be forgiven. But as Christians, sometimes we make mistakes. We do things we shouldn't do. Sometimes we make some pretty big mistakes. We make a pretty big mess in our lives. Now we can be forgiven as Christians. And sometimes we hurt our character and our reputation. But just like it was built the first time, it can be built the second time by being forgiven and living the right way and showing people that we're really serious. So we don't want to leave a message of doom and gloom to anyone, that if you've done certain things, there's no hope for you. But the main focus of the lesson is to get us to think before we do certain things. And it's far better to avoid doing these things than it is to try to deal with the consequences of these wrong decisions in our lives. That's true of young people as well as adults. I hope you'll go back and read again the story of David and Bathsheba, but I hope you'll look at it from the standpoint that we've talked about this morning and see some things that David didn't see that he should have seen, and that would help him. And we need to see those same things in our lives, and that will help us to avoid these bad situations. Well, thank you for your good attention this morning.
我们刚刚听过的就是Gilbert弟兄他为我们解释的，就是讲说，在大卫在撒母耳记下的时候，大卫他跟拔示巴发生的一些事情。那今天早上他的课程呢，是要告诉我们说，一些事情就是当拔示巴跟大卫所发生的事情之间，有一些事情是大卫没有看到的。那他就告诉我们说，我们通常在阅读撒母耳记下的时候，我们就会看到说，大概他的故事就是告诉我们大卫和拔示巴发生之间的关系，就是讲说大卫他在屋顶上，在平台上就是看到拔示巴就是乌利亚的妻子，然后呢就对他有了肉体上的情谊，过后呢就想要来跟他一起同床，然后就发生了奸淫的事情。那我们通常就会看这一些大卫所做过的事情。但是我们今天早上看到所学习到的，就是一些他没有发现，或者是他没有看到的一些事情，就是在撒母耳记下第11章，他告诉我们说，圣经无论是旧约或者是新约，在罗马书第15章第4节告诉我们，之前所写的圣经都是为了让我们来学习，为了让我们来安慰，为了我们得造就而得到希望。那今天我们要看从旧约大卫的这个故事当中来学习一些我们基督徒或者是我们朋友可以利用在生活上的事情。他就告诉我们说，大卫当他想要就是找拔示巴的太太的妻子来跟他同床的时候，他没有看到一个事情，就是讲说拔示巴她已经是一个结婚的女人，他没有看到说婚姻的圣洁，他没有看到说神他所定下的这个婚姻，它是应该是圣洁是纯洁的。要是他有看到这一点的话，他可能就不会去侵犯乌利亚的妻子。那告诉我们说，因为婚姻是神所定下来的，神一开始就是创造了亚当，然后有夏娃，然后成立了一个家庭。那婚姻就是家庭就是婚姻所带来的。那我们知道，我们圣经告诉我们，就是耶稣在马太福音第19章告诉我们说，婚姻是圣洁的，我们不可以有其他的就是搞奸淫啊，其他之间的事情。那在出埃及记20章，在十诫，在耶和华神给摩西的十诫当中，在20章出埃及记的第14节，告诉我们不可奸淫。那我们知道，要是大卫他当时候有想到说婚姻应该是圣洁的，他不应该去侵犯其他人的妻子的话，那他很有可能就不会去侵犯或者是犯下这一个罪。这个就是第一个大卫没有看到的，就是婚姻的圣洁或者是婚姻的纯洁。那我们知道，在旧约，在利未记第20章第10节告诉我们，一些就是搞奸淫啊、搞婚外情的这一些呢，他们的代价是什么？他们的代价就是会死亡。这个就是搞奸淫的一个代价。那我们也知道，就是说我们要把婚姻看得很圣洁、很纯洁的。因为在希伯来书第13章第4节告诉我们，婚姻是圣洁的，我们不可以去侵犯，我们不可以去就是去污秽那个床垫。 就是我们要保持圣洁，在婚前就好像不可以有婚前性行为啊，这一些都是要尊重的，都是神的教导。那第一点，大卫他没有看到婚姻的圣洁；第二点呢，他就是没有节制，他没有节制，他不可以就是控制他自己来去犯这一个罪，来就是跟乌利亚的妻子就是拔示巴来有这个奸淫的活动，就是他没有这个自己控制自己的能力，或者是节制，就是孝款，就是节制，就是自己控制自己，不要让自己因为奸淫，因为这个女人而犯罪。这个就是第二点，他没有看到的。然后我们也知道说，我们知道我们的生活不单只是我们自己为自己而活，很多时候，尤其是基督徒的生活，很多人都会在观察我们基督徒的生活，就好像大卫一样，他是一个王。他所犯的这个罪以后，他的名声、他的行为，已经影响到他身边的每一个人，就连他身边的每一个人知道他这些行为之后，他们都会受到影响。那我们知道，在撒母耳记下第12章的时候呢，也有告诉我们，就是说他所犯的这一个罪，他没有自己控制自己，也导致他后来的下一代发生同样的事情，就好像亚撒龙，就好像他的亚撒龙他的儿子，还有他的儿子就是他有两个，他的儿子亚撒龙，还有另外一个儿子暗嫩，就是暗嫩跟他自己的妹子，跟他自己的妹妹他玛也是同样的有这样子的奸淫的行为。所以我们看到他从自己犯了罪以后，他也影响到他接下来的下一代犯罪，犯同样的罪，这个就是罪的影响力，这个就是他没有节制，然后呢影响到他身边的人的事情。就是他的妻子，他跟乌利亚的妻子搞奸淫之后，过后他的孩子也跟自己的妹妹来搞奸淫，这个就是所受到的影响。那我们也知道，圣经告诉我们说，我们犯了罪以后，就会有罪的工价或者是罪的代价。在罗马书第6章23节告诉我们，罪的工价乃是死。那同样的，大卫他没有看到这一个罪的工价，他在那个平台上看到乌利亚的妻子的时候，他没有想到说，我犯了罪以后是有代价的。那3点他就告诉我们说，罪的工价就是罪，它是要受到惩罚的，它是要受一个结果的。那在撒母耳记下第11章第5节，他就告诉我们说，当他跟拔示巴有了奸淫之后，拔示巴就怀了胎。那他就告诉我们说，怀胎通常对我们就是夫妻都是一个喜讯，但是对大卫呢，他可是一个很悲伤的事情，因为他知道他犯罪了之后，他的工价就是他让乌利亚的妻子，他让拔示巴怀了孕，这个就是他要付出的代价。那我们也知道，就是在加拉太书第6章第7节告诉我们不可以自欺，就是不可以就是讲说自己欺骗自己，因为我们知道神他是不轻慢的，我们自己要受自己所种下来的果子，就是我们做了什么，我们接下来我们要承受那个罪的工价，这个也是他没有看到的一点。那我们知道大卫他在诗篇第51篇的时候，他告诉我们，虽然他的罪被神给原谅了，但是他说他的罪会常常的在他们面前，就好像我们说，当我们犯罪了之后，我们知道神会原谅我们，但是神会原谅我们，但是我们自己有时候就是我们不能够忘记我们所犯罪，就好像我们把铁钉钉在这里，然后要把它拔出来，拔出来之后，它还会留下痕迹。就是我们犯罪之后，神原谅了我们，我们还是会有留下那一个阴影，或者是那一个痕迹，或者是那一种生活在我们的身上。然后呢，第4点就是大卫他的犯错，就是他觉得他可以用罪来盖过另一个罪，所以这个也是他没有看到的。就是讲说，他一开始他跟拔示巴搞奸淫，过后呢，他找来了乌利亚，想要就是要让他接受，讲说这个孩子是你的。过后呢，他再犯一个罪，就是把乌利亚给杀了。所以他没有看到，就是讲说，其实用罪来掩盖罪恶是不能行的，是行不通的。这个是他没有看到的。所以我们基督徒我们要知道，我们犯罪的时候，我们要祈求的是要祈求神的原谅，而不是去在犯罪然后来盖掉我们所犯的罪，这个是行不通的。第5点，他告诉我们就是大卫他没有那个罪恶感，他没有那种内疚的， 就是感觉，就是他知道他犯错了之后，他没有觉得他有在犯错，他没有那种罪恶感，因为我们知道他告诉我们说，在撒母耳记下第11章26节，他就有说到说乌利亚的妻听见丈夫乌利亚死了，就为他哀哭。你看乌利亚被杀了，他的妻子哀哭，但是呢，对大卫来说，他没有那种罪恶感，他就觉得说，我现在用这一个杀掉了他来盖掉我之前犯的罪，所以大卫他没有罪恶感。然后呢，第6点，他告诉我们就是说，罪能让神的仇敌，就是我们犯了罪以后，我们可以让那些神的仇敌，或者是那些撒旦恶魔，来取笑神的教会，来取笑神的仆人，来取笑神的跟随者。就是大卫也没有看到，就是大卫他给机会让其他的敌人来攻击他，来取笑他。就好像我们知道，在哥林多前书第5章，保罗写给哥林多教会的信件的时候，他告诉他们说：你们所犯下的这个奸淫，连外邦人都没有这样子做。所以这个就是我们让外面的人、世界上的人有机会来取笑我们神的教会，或者是取笑跟神的跟随者。所以我们不可以让世界上的人有这些机会，我们就要控制我们自己，犯了罪要祈求神的原谅。所以简单的来说，就是讲说大卫他整个过程、整个故事在撒母耳记下第11章，就是告诉我们，就是我们可以用华人的一个谚语来说，就是一失足成千古恨。就是他犯了错以后，接下来他的生活他就必须要受到那一个代价。所以我们今天早上看了有6点，就是大卫他没有看到的一些事情。第1点，他没有看到婚姻的圣洁；第2点，他没有节制，他没有能力去控制他自己；第3点，他没有看到罪的代价，就是罪发生了以后会发生什么事情；第4点，就是他以罪来盖罪，他没有看到说我们是不可以以罪来掩盖罪的。第5点，他没有罪恶感，他没有觉得内疚，他没有那种罪恶感。第6点呢，他让神的仇敌有机会来攻击他的神的跟随者，来攻击神的教会。就像我们今天，当我们犯罪了之后，我们没有改变，反而就是越踩越深的话，我们就会让世人攻击我们了。就好像我们是基督徒，尤其是传道的，我们传道了，我们传道，但是我们出到外面的时候，我们没有行道，我们的生活是另外一个生活，那我们就给人机会来攻击我们。所以我们要明白这6点，就是我们要知道，当我们犯罪了之后，我们所要行的就是要祈求神的原谅，而不是越踩越深，继续的去犯罪。所以这个就是今天早上在我们查经班所看到的、所学习到的课程。